In my early teens, a group of us girls planned this great excursion to Brig Lows, about 3 miles west of town. We pedaled our bikes loaded with camping gear. We pictured ourselves as great outdoors women. We planned to live off the land, and fish were top on the menu. As it turned out, all we caught were minnows. We wondered how many of those we'd have to eat before we got full. Some of us got full just watching the others eat. Before we went to bed, we had to dig hip holes to lay our bodies in. After readjusting our bodies to fit the hip holes, we still couldn't find our comfort zone. We talked for hours, then finally went to sleep. In the blackness of the night, we heard some noises coming through the bushes. We were sure there was someone sneaking around. Boy, were we scared. We all left our hip holes and snuggled in together. The next morning, we scouted around and found it must have been cows. I remember we had jobs to do every Saturday before we could do anything else. I got a allowance of 5 or 10 cents a week, and if I could babysit for Margaret, I would earn maybe 25 cents if I was lucky. We weren't allowed to go downtown, but we could go to Gould's store a block away to buy ice cream and candy. When I was 12 or 13 years old, I started to notice the boys. They had tried to get my attention by pulling my braids, but after I had my hair cut, I really noticed them. My first boyfriend, Max Williams, was really good looking and had a big motorbike. Wow, was that neat. In the early summer, I learned a great lesson in obedience. My parents were strict and expected their children to mind. I found out that my dad really followed through with his threats. A group of us had gone to a show. Then after, they all wanted to go to a dance at the open-air pavilion, where the Lions Park is now. I knew I wasn't supposed to be there, but the peer pressure assured me it was all right. I knew I was out past my allotted time, and I wanted to die when I saw my father standing on the side of the dance floor. Needless to say, I learned a lesson of obedience that I never forgot. One of the early experiences that developed a testimony of prayer was the morning the kitchen stove blew up. At this time, we had just been gathered from the kitchen to kneel in the living room for family prayers. Mom had been cooking breakfast over the old coal stove. Heat had caused pressure to build up inside the hot water jacket, and while we were kneeling for prayers, the stove exploded like a bomb, sending the lids of the stove into the ceiling, the cast iron out the window. As we rushed into the kitchen, we found the room a complete disaster. Some of us could have been injured or killed had it not been for family prayers that morning. Well, there were great times ahead, golden green balls and such. The dances were so much fun. If you did go with a date, you didn't have to dance with him all night. You had a dance card to fill out when other boys asked you to dance. The time for state conference had arrived. In those days, there were 2 sessions during the day and a youth session at night. That afternoon, Dorothy had her date Bud phone me to see if I would go on a date, a blind date, with his friend Bill Meyer. I said no, I already had a date. I really didn't, I just didn't want to go. I went with some other girls. We got seated. Then just before the meeting started, I leaned forward and looked down the row. There, to my surprise, sat Dorothy and Bud and the fellow I was asked to go on the blind date with. I don't know if it was the bells I heard or the gong of being caught. I tried not to look at him during the rest of the meeting, and I wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. But we did end up going to a friend's house for refreshments after, and that was the start of our courting days. I was hooked. We dated from then on. My high school days were over, and I got a job working at the Royal Bank. My work at the bank was delivering bank drafts to the businesses on the street. Each time I came out of a building, there sat Brownie, waiting to escort me to the next place or home or wherever I went. The only reason I endured his presence was that he was about the most religious dog I knew. During the summertime, when the tabernacle doors were left open for ventilation, and after the people were seated, Brownie would just walk partly up the aisle and take in the service. During the wintertime, Brownie got confused about where Bill was. At this time, Bill owned an ice cream parlor, and the time he spent with me was limited. So guess who kept me company? Brownie. It was hard to convince Brownie that dogs weren't my favorite animal. I'd rather spend time with his master. Many a cold winter night, Brownie would sit on our front porch waiting to escort Bill home. But unknown to the dog, Bill wasn't there. So I'd phone Bill to come and get his pooch. But because it was so cold, Bill would go out the back door of his shop and pucker up and give a shrill whistle. Brownie knew he was in the wrong place, and homeward he would go.
I'll never forget the first time Gene invited me for dinner. I was as nervous as a schoolboy going on his first date. Most of the family were in the living room, making with the small talk. Gene's dad left to see how things were going. When he returned, he invited the family to dinner. He looked me right in the eye. Bill, there's a couple of magazines over on that end table that you can read. Well, Gene's mom finally came to my rescue and assured me they had set a place and pay no attention to her joking husband. It was now time for dessert, and I wanted so much to make a good impression with the joke I was telling. I threw my hands in the air to emphasize a point, and yep, you guessed it, the dessert I was being served went flying to the floor. Need I say more?
Bill courted me by pedaling me on his bike. Or we would walk around the temple, contemplating our eternal marriage. By this time, Dorothy was dating Howard Wood, and he had a car, so they invited us to share fun times together.
It was in the early spring of '51 that we became engaged. I had purchased the rings and had planned getting engaged after our ball club returned from playing a tournament in the States. But instead of an engagement party, I became engaged to a bad case of the mumps. The biggest challenge of all was yet to come, asking Frank for his daughter's hand in marriage. He had a reputation for dealing with his daughter's suitors, and I couldn't help but wonder what he had in store for me. Frank was in the elevator office when I came to call. I paced up and down the ramp, building up my courage to knock on that door. I finally did and was invited in. I stated my case and why I was there, as if he didn't know, and expressed my great love for his daughter. And believe it or not, He treated me like he wouldn't mind having me for a son-in-law.
Now, the big decision. The date was finally set for August 15th, 1951. The plans were in motion. But in the meantime, Ben and Lydia were getting married in Provo. Lydia asked me to be a bridesmaid, and that was great. This gave me a chance to see firsthand what a wedding was all about and give me some ideas for my own. I could also look for a wedding dress. The big day arrived. It was a beautiful autumn day. I wasn't too concerned about the wedding plans, for I knew that Mom had everything under control. After the wedding ceremony, we had to rush to Lethbridge to have our formal pictures taken. The reception was held at the social center. Dorothy was my maid of honor. Connie was my bridesmaid. The honor of best man went to Cass. It was a lovely reception, and lots of people came to wish us well. We honeymooned in the Banff area. For the first 10 years of our marriage, we owned an ice cream parlor in Cardston, which we operated with the help of Bill's mother. We never opened on Sundays, nor did we sell cigarettes, tea, coffee, or any of the cola drinks. This brought many inquiries of why, and these questions gave us the opportunity to share some of our beliefs about the church and the word of wisdom.
We rented a 2-room apartment in the Annie Rasmussen home, located on 4th Avenue, just off Main Street, where the swimming pool now sits. After renting for a few months, we bought our first home. It consisted of 2 small bedrooms, a kitchen, and a small living room. It was actually 2 granaries put together with a biffy in the back, which I'm happy to report was no longer in service. We often wondered how to rid ourselves of this eyesore. Well, Mother Nature solved the problem. One night, the west wind blew and blew and blew. We were just lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long before the roof would come off. Well, the roof held, the biffy, not a trace was ever found, not one single board.
Our first child and only daughter, Valerie Jean, was born in the Cardston Hospital, 19th of November, 1953. Valerie was positively the most beautiful baby we'd ever seen, and time would show she had the spirit to match. It was such an easy birth that I said I wouldn't mind having a dozen just like her. The nurses never brought Valerie to me for her night feeding, so I was unaware of this ritual. The first night we had her home, she cried for something to eat, and we, being the good parents that we were, just let her cry. There was no way we were going to spoil her. How's this for a first? How many babies do you know that were weaned from their mother to drink from a straw? Valerie was my pride and joy and usually took the part of a peacemaker.